Hi, I'm Marcia Roscoe, leading the Breathing in Christ community since 2013. Breathing in Jesus, examining what's most important to live into our desire to love God, ourselves, and others deeper. Genesis 2:7 tells us that God's holy breath forms us. Are you ready to consciously connect to Christ one breath at a time? Are you ready to honor every aspect of your life, what you say, what you think and do, as sacred encounters with God and others? Breathing in Christ discovers the life God intends and is here to help you align your habits and your behaviors with God's love. Because after all, how we live is how we love. Again, this is Marcia Roscoe, and welcome to the Breathing in Christ community. I am thrilled to have with me today Pastor Matthew Best. Matt, you are from St. Stephen Lutheran Church in New Kingstown. And I'm kind of cheating in having you here today because we have worked with spiritual types in a variety of ways. But before we get to that, can you just share with our listeners a little bit about what this season has been like for you?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I got to tell you that this season feels like a roller coaster. Every day, every hour sometimes is, you're either up, you're down. It's based on phone calls. It's based on emails that you get. It's based on conversations that you have, Zoom calls, some kind of article in the news, or something that you see on Facebook or something like that. Just really kind of throws you one way or the other, and really kind of what I'm recognizing is a lot of folks are going through trauma, and I think that includes myself as well, trying to figure it out. And in one sense, it kind of reminds me of what it's been like to I have a long experience working in politics.
Yes, you do.
So I've done political campaigns, and in one sense, this feels no different than working on a campaign.
How have your spiritual practices in this season grounded you?
Yeah, so they've, I don't know if grounded is the right word. The spiritual practices that I've been doing have kind of altered and shifted, and they've helped me explore different things, I think might be the best way to talk about that. One of my spiritual practices is writing, and it's allowed me to go to deeper places, to talk about things that people don't want to talk about, to just explore and ask questions that don't really have answers, or are so complex that there aren't one nice answer wrapped up in a bow. The other places, the other things that have been helpful have been prayer, again, where it's just allowed me to go deeper to one of the things that's going to be coming out soon, maybe out by the time that the podcast is out, is I'm doing just a short reading and reflection on lament. Because I think lament is something that we suck at, and we have forgotten how to do, if we ever really even knew how to do it. And yet the Bible is just chock full of lament. A third of the Psalms are laments. And you've got the book of Lamentations, and you've got Job, and you've got Jeremiah, and in the Gospels, you've got lament, and Paul's writings are full of lament. And yes, there's hope and those type of things, but a huge portion of the Bible is lament, which makes sense when you've got people who are so disoriented and lost for such long periods of time. Generations are lost and disoriented and out of control, and they know they're out of control. And the only thing you can do when you're out of control is lament. And so I've been really exploring the idea of lament, and a lot of my prayers have been prayers of lament, which is nothing that I would have expected, nothing that I had planned for even just a couple of months ago, but it's just where being drawn to right now.
Yeah, I mean that's really appropriate in this season of liminal space, right? I mean, kind of the space between things. So, just a little sidebar for our listeners: if they would want to access what you're talking about here, where would they find that?
The, what,
The,
uh,
the writings or on the lament pieces
oh
that you're
yeah.
working on.
The lament piece is going to be, it'll end up being on our church Facebook page, which is, you can search for St. Stephen Evangelical Lutheran Church, New Kingstown. You can also, you'll be able to find it on my own website, which is pastormatthewbest.com. You'll just have to do a little bit of a search for it by when it actually comes out.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So, as I said in the beginning, you're really like a 4-for-1 or a 7-for-1 because you're actually one of the rare equal balanced parts of all 4 types. And so, I want to talk a little bit about that. But also, we've worked with this information with your congregation, so they've had some experience with spiritual types. But tell me in your own words how you understand and experience the 4 types, and how you've been able to see that in your way of life, your decisions, your rituals, your behaviors.
Yeah. So, being somebody who's blended through this, so I remember, Marcia, when you went over the 4 different types and you're going through them, and I think you started off with earth.
Yep.
And I was going through and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can identify with that. It must be an earth, but not 100%, but okay. And then you went to, I think, water,
Yeah.
right? And you're going through and I'm like, well, yeah, that too,
Remember,
but not
yeah.
100%, but and then we went to air and I was like, okay, what's the deal here, right? And then you take the test and I'm going through and I'm like, well, is it A, B, C, or D? And I'm like, yes,
Right.
right. So for me personally, all 4 types are not compartmentalized types. They just flow one into the other. There is, and this is just the way that I look at it and experience these type of things. That there is an integration, not a separation and a divide between them. That one, it's kind of like where in the one body, many parts that Paul writes about in First Corinthians. Because the core, maybe you need kind of almost a center circle in the middle of that box. The core center of that, I don't know what the center would be. Maybe it's faith, but faith oftentimes gets stuck. People have this idea that it's intellectual assent. It's believing a set of beliefs, and faith is more integrated into a full body experience. It's the expression of what you believe. And what you believe and how you express it are not separate from each other, just as the 4 different types are not separate from each other. They have aspects that they highlight, but for me, they're so interconnected that it allows me to just slip right into from one into the other based on the situation. It's kind of like, people ask me, well, what type of worship do you like? And, my answer is yes. I love the Easter Vigil. It's one of my favorite services of the entire year. I was so disappointed that I didn't get to do an Easter Vigil this year. And, Easter Vigil is like the Super Bowl of the year, and it's about as high church as anything.
Yes.
And I love it. And at the same time, I don't want to do that every week. That would drive me crazy. And so the other aspect that I love are just, when I just sit in silence and listen, and that's just as worshipful, if that's a word, and meaningful, and to be able to listen to the Spirit move through, and hear things, and how is God speaking right now? What is God doing? How is God poking? And not having any answers whatsoever, not having a time frame, not having a flow. And so for me, it's not a matter of which is better. It's more of a matter of what's appropriate at the current time. What's speaking right now? How is God at work right now? And sometimes that's in very formal, structured ways. And other times that's in very informal and unstructured ways. And maybe that's not even the best way. It's in both and neither and at the same time, and that's an extremely Lutheran answer of paradox, right?
Right. You know what I love, if you just even listen to the language that you just used, the imagery, the words really embody all four types. I mean, you talked about structure and order. You talked about fluidity and slipping in and out. You talked about not having all the answers. I mean, Pastor Bess, you really embody all four types. You are a true integration. I couldn't have scripted that for you, which is just absolutely awesome. Awesome. And so you're one of those people that I should invite to every party, every team, because you would have the ability to really relate to folks and understand what their passions are. Because what's so unique about spiritual types is it is not personality driven. Okay, so like when we think about Myers-Briggs or even Enneagram, they're personality driven. What spiritual types does is say, okay, our behaviors and our traditions and our rituals actually shape our personality. And so if our starting point is how we're connected to God, and it looks like you can connect to God with every breath in creation by doing justice and service work, that means that you probably have a wide vessel of spiritual practices to draw from. But I'm going to tell you, you're rare. Okay. So
Yeah. Well, and Marcia, if I could just jump in for a minute, I attribute a lot of this to when I was growing up. I grew up Roman Catholic, and so there's a lot of smells and bells and all that kind of great stuff. But there's also the aspect of Catholicism which deals with mysticism and mystics.
Yes.
And the two, I grew to love both liturgy and the mystics, and didn't see a conflict in those type of things. The mystics are special, and the liturgy is special, and the mystics loved the liturgy, and at the same time knew that liturgy was more than just it's got to be checkbox type of thing. There's a flow through things, and there's a life. The worship service is a life. And so think about how life is. There's one of the things, we have a couple of huddles at our church, and so we talk about different shapes, and one of them is has to do with the 7 characteristics of life. And so think about the characteristics of life, and life has to do with movement, and it has to do with sensitivity, and it has to do with respiration, and getting rid of things that are unhealthy, and nutrition, and all that, and all those lead to growth. And so those are living things. And so when it comes to spirituality types, for me, I just see it as those are living things. They move, and they move between, just as over the course of a day, you start and sleep, and then you have this kind of wake up period where it takes you a little bit, and things aren't very there yet. And then you start going through the day, and then you're moving, and then you at some point you hit your stride, whatever your whatever point that is, and then you have your downtime, and then there's kind of like, okay, it's time to relax a little bit, and then there's sleep again, and there's rhythm to it, and they flow in, and you wouldn't want to be in one of those states all day. And so for somebody like myself, who has this blended approach to the 4 spirituality types, that's what it's like for me to think about. This is no different than how I would want any other aspect of my life, is for these things to flow in and out over the course of faith and life.
So I know that your congregation has been actively involved in congregational renewal, and at least I know your leadership team, I believe, is familiar with the spiritual types experience. Yes. But beyond that, I'm not sure. Can you share how your congregation has either worked with it or what that experience has been like?
Yeah, so we put it into our congregational magazine. We don't do a newsletter. We scrapped that, instead went to a quarterly magazine which talks about encounters with Jesus.
I love that, by the way. Encounters with Jesus. Love it.
Yeah, to get away from just being an information type of thing to being, what is it that the church is supposed to be about? It's about encounters with Jesus. And yes, that incorporates information. I mean, think about this. This is the four things.
I know. when I first saw it, I was impressed. Yes.
So we incorporated the spiritual types in there as an aspect, and unfortunately the pandemic hit, and so some of the plans that we had that we were going to do to incorporate those were kind of put on hold. But I can tell you that one of the things that we did do before that was during Lent. We have a midweek Lent service. And so what I did is I crafted a service that touched on those different types of spiritualities. So we would incorporate, we had a set liturgy, and it didn't look like a regular worship service, but it was set that we were going to do certain things, and it was going to take a certain amount of time. But there was also going to be opportunity to sit and to listen. And so we had different types of singing from different cultures that were singing religious music. So we had the first Sunday was the singing of the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, which is what Jesus would have said the Lord's Prayer in. And to just hear that over and over and over again, to just sit and listen and let it flow through. And we had stations. And so one of the other stations had to do with touch. And, we had different things. So we had a crown of thorns there. It's a very tangible type of thing, but it would also then give a sense of kind of cause and movement. One of the things that we had was a prayer station. And I got to tell you, it was extremely powerful to be in the back of the sanctuary, hearing the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic being sung, and then people coming up and allowed people to then participate in a way that spoke to their spirituality type. And so I would just ask them, what do you want to lift in prayer? Is it a Thanksgiving? Is it a prayer request? What is it? And they would be able to talk, and we were able to pick out, well, what are the different spiritual types based on what people are saying. And some people are more formal, and some people didn't have any idea really. They just knew they had to come, and so I could ask them some questions, and of course it helps to know the folks. But then we would have at the end of the service, during the service, we would do a prayer, read one of the Psalms back and forth, a responsive type of thing. We would have, and then I had a worksheet at the end where there was some time for silence, and people could do one of 4 different things. They could go and light a candle. They could write out a prayer. They could commit to what kind of action are they going to do based on what God spoke to them about. And, it was just kind of different things, or reread the Psalm that we read, and what kind of response do you have? There were a variety of different ways. And so we did that each week, and it really was a nice way to incorporate the different spirituality types in for people. So it wasn't just one way, where oftentimes in Sunday worship, that's, oftentimes gets stuck in one way. This was a way for people to really kind of go deeper to their spirituality type, and also have the option to experience a different type of spirituality.
Right. Oh, I love that. I mean, it sounds like there was some deep integration that used the 4 different types with a variety of tools and practices. And so my experience has been that when we offer a variety, maybe not each experience speaks to everyone, but when we understand that it's not just about us individually, but for the sake of the whole, that maybe one of those experiences might not have been as deep of a connection point for me, but to know that my neighbor who's sitting there with me and that experience might have really deeply touched them, enables me to just to feel that circle of grace and that unconditional love in a new way. So the intentionality behind that you put into that is really delicate. And so thank you for doing that and working with that.
Yeah, it was really powerful. I got to tell you, especially during the prayer time, that's the time that everybody would go. When it was time for that individual prayer. And there were tears flowing from all the different types of spirituality types. And it's not just the pastor praying for somebody. There were folks who prayed for me, and that was extremely powerful, to not just have to be the one who's running the service, but then to be on the receiving end as well. Just very touching and very needed.
Yeah. And I just want to also thank St. Stephen, because I know Stacy Schroeder has put together that magazine, really pulled that together well. And so you can actually find that article. She worked with me to extrapolate the 4 pages. So on breathinginchrist.com, it's there for our listeners if they would like to take a look at that. But I'm really thankful that St. Stephen has been a forerunner in this and experience. So I look forward to watching how that continues to evolve in the parish. But so for right here and right now, what do you feel like is connecting you or calling you to respond to God's love and action in the world? And how do you see that possibly motivated by your spiritual type experience?
So what I see a lot of right now is trauma in people. And it comes out in a variety of different ways. One of the things that just in the last 24 hours or so is I see a lot of responses of anger, and whether justified or not, there's just a lot of anger. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a lot of folks who feel dislodged, disoriented. They're getting a sense of how out of control they are. Human beings do not like to be out of control, or at least do not like to have the sense that they are out of control, the perception of it. The fact is that we are not in control. I mean, all you need to do is have kids to show that you're not in control. Are you kidding? Right? I have 4 kids, so I'm out of the control all the time, right? We just kind of put on the show that we think we're in control. Or be married. Right? So the world is going through this worldwide trauma experience, and we're not used to it. And so what happens when we're disoriented and we're out of that sense of control is, and I see it because we deal a lot with homelessness in this congregation. There's in the typical American way, there's 2 responses, right? There's always just 2 options, right? But that's not true ever, right? But you can kind of classify how people are going to do when you're dealing with somebody who's experiencing homelessness. You can tell how it's going to go based on what kind of assertion of control that they put on. Oftentimes, somebody ends up in a situation where they're experiencing homelessness. This is not a across the board type of thing, right? Bad things happen to people of no fault of their own, right? But there are situations where people fall into homelessness, and it's because they their life was spinning out of control. And so what they did is they did the natural reaction, which is to try and assert more control in order to stop the spinning out of control. That makes perfect sense. That's completely logical to do. And yet it's the worst thing that somebody can do when they're spiraling out of control. It's kind of like driving a car. I grew up in Western New York. It snows in Western New York, right? And so I always learned driving in a car, when you hit an ice patch and you start to spin, the idea is not to try and force the car in the direction you want to go. It's to recognize that you're not in control. And so you have to work with the way the car is going. And so you have to adjust the way you steer so it's in the opposite direction in order to get it so that it'll straighten out. You don't apply the brake on ice, right? Like slam on that makes it worse. You're exerting more control and it makes it worse. So the same idea applies in life, right? So when I think about the spirituality types and I think about the idea of trauma, what I see is that our familiar spirituality types can help bring a sense of control. And part of that has to be that we have to start with an understanding of what is our spirituality type. And so this is an education thing for folks to get a hold of. And then secondly, to see how does that apply to other folks, right? We got to get away from when we're in trauma, everything gets centered on us individually. Individualism kind of comes out because it has to do with survival, right? It's a natural human instinct to worry about your own survival. And that's fine to a certain extent, but the problem is that if we just focus on individualism, that doesn't work, and it leads to bad things. And that's where, the anger comes out because,
Right.
well, nobody else is doing it my way, right? And I know what's best for me, and it's about my survival. And the problem with that is we forget how interconnected we are with everybody else. And so the spirituality types allow us to see how other folks are trying to deal with trauma, the same trauma we're going through. We are connected through trauma. We're connected through humanity, but we're also then connected through trauma. And it doesn't mean we have to go and do those different spirituality types, but it's to take a look and see, well, what is it about this other spirituality practice or type or whatever that's appealing and satisfying some kind of need that that person has? And what is it about the way that I'm practicing my faith that is satisfying some kind of need that I have? What is that need? We need to almost name what those needs are, and then to be able to say, okay, how do these things overlap? How are they integrated? How do they differ? Where is there going to be conflict? And how can we be supportive of one another? Because if we just focus in, it's Luther's definition of sin, which is turning inward on oneself. If
Right.
that's all we do, it's not going to end well.
Right.
It's going to go from angry words to angry actions. And that doesn't end well for anybody.
Right. Right. No, I really appreciate that. And I think too, my experience has been that not just when we're in trauma that our spiritual type, our dominant spiritual type is keeps a sense of control, but sometimes I think we're challenged to try a different spiritual type because we need to grow a little bit or be more integrated and tap into a part of ourselves that we don't normally, because two of the types, earth and fire, are head types. Water and air are heart types. And so when we want to integrate head and heart to at least have some intentionality of both practices allows for some integration and some stabilization. So yeah, I really appreciate your work with that. And hope that you'll let me know if there's ways that spiritual types can help you in that process.
Well, and part of that is intentionality, right? I mean,
Sure.
but a lot, we were talking about this before you recorded, is we're asking people to do things in the church or the nation or the state or whatever institution you want to pick with, casting a vision and all these type of things. And we're asking people to do that, and they're not doing it in their own personal lives. Not because they're dumb or idiots or anything like that. It's just never been, it's never been taught. It's never been expected. It's never
Right.
been there. And so people don't know a lot of this. And so a lot of people are just kind of floating through life, which is really a shame because it's a lost time. It's a lost opportunity, a gift that's not being opened up that God has given us. And the spiritual types, they're gifts that we've been given, and given to explore and to use to walk together with everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really value about spiritual types is the simplicity. And it provides a very simple framework because it isn't about scoring a certain number on a test and having some linear equation that adds up, but rather it might be a better entry point for folks just to start talking about and noticing how God is present. So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to move you to your fire. What I love about you is that I know how to engage the fire side of you. And so I recruited you, I'm so thankful, to be one of our faculty members at the Stevenson School for Ministry. And you're going to be teaching doing politics through the lens of faith. And so I wondered if you would be willing to share with us a little bit about how you have crafted that course design, perhaps paying attention to the spiritual types, but more importantly, I just want to give you some space to share how your fire comes out when it comes to doing politics through the lens of faith. So I'm going to turn it over and just let you run loose, a little bit dangerous, but I'm going to let your fire burn.
Oh, thank you very much, Marcia. Yeah. You know that politics is my first language. I have said that for forever.
Right.
Politics is my first language, which, oftentimes people are like, well, how'd you jump from politics to religion? And I got to tell you, politics and religion are the same exact thing. And most people, the separation of church and state. Yeah, no. When I say politics and religion are the same thing, for me, what they come down to is that both of them are attempting to cast a vision of a possible future. That's what it ultimately comes down to. I mean, think about that in terms of any political campaign, especially, we think about political campaigns, we think of presidential campaigns, right? And what do presidential campaigns do? They try to cast a vision of whatever that candidate's vision is of the future. And some of them are clearer than others, right? And I can tell you that any candidate who has ever lost has sucked at answering the question, why are you running? You can't answer the question of why you're running. Like, there's historical examples of this. So in 1980, when Senator Ted Kennedy ran in the Democrat primary against Jimmy Carter, he was asked that question and he bombed it. And that was the end of his campaign.
Right.
That's just one example. So you can pull out. It happens on both the Republican and Democrat sides. They can't answer the question of why are you running? Then you don't obviously have a vision. You're just running because you want to get to the office. Well, that's not helping anybody, right? A vision has to encompass all people. It has to be about who we are as a whole, that type of thing. And so religion, maybe not the institution so much as the practice of religion, although the institution is a part of it, right? There's no difference. Mm-hmm. And the integration of the institution and movement is a part of this. You need both of them. And so what is religion doing? It's casting a vision. It's God's vision, the unfolding of the kingdom of God and everything that it stands for. What do I do as a pastor? Well, I'm just the campaign manager right here who gets to talk about what God's vision is, right? I'm campaigning for God. God is the candidate.
I love that.
Except it's kind of in reverse because God's already chosen us. We don't get to vote for God.
Right.
God has already voted for us. So in one sense, that's the start of it for me. And so I think if politics is my first religion, church is like a campaign. And I know it gets scary for people when you start talking about politics and religion and so understanding definitions is really important. When I say politics, there's a definition for that. Politics is not the same thing as partisanship. That's the first thing I got to say. And I got to tell you, I worked for a member of Congress during an impeachment trial back when Clinton was impeached. I've worked for a state representative. I've worked for a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. I did my own government affairs work. I've managed campaigns. I've done strategy. I've been the chair of statewide organizations, all in politics and everything. And I will tell you, there is a distinct difference between politics and partisanship. And people don't want to believe that, but that's really important to understand.
Sure.
Because politics, again, you wanted to aspect the faith aspect of that is that the Trinity is a political group.
Oh, that's charged.
Extremely charged. But think about this. What is politics at its core? Politics is nothing more than a group of people who come together and figure out how to make decisions.
Oh, wow.
That's it.
That's a mic drop. That is a mic drop right there.
That's what the Trinity does, right? The Trinity has different aspects of God. I don't want to get into it because then I'm going to get heretical, of course. But
yeah, I call it the economic principle of the Trinity, but you have a point.
Political, right? The Trinity is political because the Trinity, God, 3 in 1, has come together to form a perfect community, and the and the Trinity has figured out how to make decisions that have an impact for the greater good. That's all politics is. Right now, where we get into trouble is partisanship.
Yeah, yeah.
Because partisanship is not for the greatest good, it's for the pursuit of power, right? So one of the things that we're going to do in this course is we're going to define terms, because those are really important. We're going to share stories, there's some powerful stories in history. I try to draw from both partisan political perceptions, because I think there are some great examples throughout our history, and in recent times too, in the last couple of decades, that there are some great examples where the difference between politics and partisanship has shown up, and it can go through a partisan way.
Mm-hmm.
Partisanship hasn't turned into an idolatrous god to be worshipped, which in a lot of times it's happened. So you think about think about all the politics that happens in the Bible.
The New
Testament is jam-packed with it. The New Testament is jam-packed with it. And yet we think, oh no, Jesus wasn't political at all. Right, sure he wasn't.
Right.
He only claimed Messiah. What happened to Messiahs in Israel? They were executed. Why? By Rome. Why? Because it was a threat to Rome and their power. If that's not political, I don't know what is. The title King of the Jews, when he was born, what had happened? The King of the Jews, Herod, sends troops and slaughters a whole village because he's afraid of losing political power. And then at his death, above the crucifixion, he's got above his head, King of the Jews, by a Roman governor. Why? Because Jesus is a threat to Rome. It's politics all throughout, but we want to have this idea of, oh no, Jesus isn't political. And I think a lot of that has to do with, because if Jesus is political, we might have to do some self-examination. And we might have to take a look and see, is our politics informing our faith, or is faith informing our politics?
Amen.
And we don't want to do that, because then we're not in control, and then we're not the centerpiece, and then we don't get to tell God what to do. So we're going to examine those type of things, and we're going to look at, where is politics in the Old Testament, where is it in the New Testament, and it's not about pushing an agenda, a political agenda that we think of in our terms. It is a political agenda, and it's God's agenda that has to do with moving us towards the kingdom of God. And it's not about, the ridiculous question of, would Jesus be a Democrat or Republican? He wouldn't be either. Are you kidding?
Right, absolutely.
That's
there's boundaries. Yep.
You might as well ask Jesus, well, is he more in line with Rome or the temple?
Right.
It's the exact same type of thing. Those were power structures in place. And Jesus, what we saw, he wasn't in favor of either one of those. So why would he want to? First of all, he wasn't an American, so he's not registered. He wouldn't have been registered to vote. So why would he care which party?
Right.
Anyway, so that's kind of the focus. And one of the things that we'll end up doing is the people who go through this class are going to write their own political platform based on faith. So we're going to walk people through that.
No,
and the importance of that is that a political platform is a set of ideals that guides how decisions are supposed to be made.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that there's such a yearning for leaders, voters, to be equipped with bringing their Christian morals and ethics to the vote, to their votes. Do you have any intent of working the spiritual types perspectives into the course design, just paying attention to the motivators? Because morals and ethics are all grounded in what we believe and how we live that.
I don't know if it will be explicit.
No, I'm not asking. Yeah, probably not.
But given the fact that I'm just this blended person,
all four,
it's gonna come through, because even when I think about what I'm having people doing, it's tapping into those different spirituality types. There's going to be some writing, there's going to be some prayer, there's going to be some listening, there's going to be all these different aspects that we talk about that deal with the heart and the head. And even when we're writing, it's not just a head exercise, it's a heart exercise as well.
Right.
Because that gets into our identity of who we are. And that's part of where I think doing politics through the lens of Jesus is talking about what is our identity. Our identity is founded in Jesus, not in our partisan affiliation or anything like that. And I think it's so very important when we're coming into, what everybody describes as a really important election. Yes, this is a dangerous topic to touch, let alone talk about. Just to touch the idea of politics and to do it from a faith perspective, there are people who are going to assume lots of things, and you know what happens when we assume. So,
right.
No
doubt.
You say the word politics, and there's lots of people who think they know what party I'm registered in because they hear me preach this way or that or the other thing. I can tell you that they don't. I can tell you right now I'm registered nonpartisan because of my faith background.
Right.
That and the way that I see it. Does that mean it's wrong for people to be part of a political party? No, of course not. You got to do what works and what makes the most sense. And there's nothing wrong with those type of things. They're not inherently evil. What happens, the challenge and the danger is if we allow partisanship to become more important than our faith. If we allow partisanship to be our identity ahead of Jesus, and that's no different whether you're talking about politics or money or anything else, then at that point it becomes idolatry. And that's what's making our decisions, as opposed to what our faith is supposed to be making the decisions and informing everything else around us. It's supposed to be the core and the center of who we are. And then it goes outward from there. And politics is a part of that. And for some people, partisan politics is going to be a part of that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes more important than faith, that's where there's a problem. And I think that's where we have a lot of issues and challenges going on in our world, or at least in our nation today.
Right. Well, you just have me on a cliffhanger. This course doesn't even kick off until late August, I believe. I'll put a description in the link below. But I am really thankful that you're going to lead us through this faithful discussion, and your leadership has been a real gift all around. Are there any just parting words of wisdom that you want to share with us?
Parting words of wisdom.
Yeah, this integrated spiritual type of earth, water, air, or fire. I'm sure there's a question I could have asked, but the Spirit did not. Maybe I got in the way of it. But yeah.
How's this for a good blended spirituality test statement? Is ask questions. Because when you ask questions, you open yourself to all sorts of different possibilities, and it will lead you into all four different types of spirituality that exist. And just be open, be uncomfortable. This is one of the things, right? Why are we so afraid to be uncomfortable?
Oh, we are not good as a culture. We avoid discomfort as much as possible.
Right. And this is why I think we're having so much trouble in a pandemic, is because we're not used to being uncomfortable or inconvenienced. And what is faith? It's completely uncomfortable and inconvenient. I mean, we're not in control, right? And so I would say embrace being uncomfortable, embrace being inconvenienced, because that's where God shows up. That's where God is poking us and saying, hey, you got to let this die in you. We're called to life, death, and resurrection. And so that's not just literal life, death, and resurrection. That's every day. That's different aspects of our life where we think that we're in control. That needs to die. What needs to die today? Maybe that's the words to wisdom. What needs to die in your life so that resurrection can happen, so that faith has room, so that God can work through you into the fullest way possible, and is begging you to participate in the unfolding of the kingdom of God, which is a heck of a lot better than anything we're experiencing right now or were before.
Oh
There's
my
your words of
gosh.
wisdom.
I love it. And we're going to end with that. What thoughtful reflections to leave us with. So thank you very much. And we'll make sure that people have access to your blog and to your Facebook page. And I just, again, I'm honored to be with you on this journey.
Thank you very much, Marcia. It's been a blessing.